Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan. Today is episode 193, and today we're going to take a look at the Seafarers International Union of North America. Kind of an interesting one. It has the good, the bad, and the ugly associated with it. But before we dive into this one, let me give a big shout out to our listeners because as usual, you guys are awesome. We love to see you here online. Do check out our YouTube channel and thank you so much for subscribing. Do leave us feedback, leave a comment, say hello, whatever the case may be. We love to see you guys there. So a big shout out to Oklahoma, California, New York, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Minnesota, Colorado, Wisconsin, Hawaii, and Florida. In terms of countries, the United States, the Russian Federation, and Australia. Good to see all of you. Okay, so this labor union was founded October 14th in 1938. However, their history goes back to around the turn of the century, and the reason why is because this union is a conglomerate of several different labor unions that deal with the oceans and the seas, and so their history goes back to the turn of the century, whereas this particular large union that has gobbled up these smaller unions, they only go back to 1938. But their members' history in terms of their smaller labor unions goes back to the turn of the century, so this is nothing new in terms of occupation. They are headquartered in Camp Springs, Maryland. They have one location in terms of countries, even though it is an international trade union. Their one location is in the United States, but the reason why they are considered an international trade union is because of their other smaller labor unions that they have gobbled up. Some of them have locations in Canada, and Canada is not exactly a fan of this labor union. So I always wondered if Canada actually likes being a part of America in terms of our labor unions. This is a perfect example of where they do not, because typically Canada does not like the United States, and Canadians typically do not have very nice things to say about Americans. Nothing new with that. That's just how it is. Now, in terms of numbers and in terms of members, as of 2005, they had 35,498 members, which that's quite a few. I'm very impressed with that number, so they're going strong. In terms of people, their key people, Michael Sacco, SACCO, is their president. Unfortunately, he's been president for them since 1988. I think that's too long. I think that's kind of ridiculous, and I think it's becoming more and more like a bureaucracy. So the longer you have someone in a position of power, typically the more stagnant your organization becomes. Now here's the thing, that's in regards to trade unions, not private sector companies. Here's the thing, when someone actually owns a company, they own it and they are the CEO unless they pass that responsibility on to somebody else. In terms of trade unions and labor unions, they do need to change management. They really do. Because they don't own, excuse me, losing my voice. They don't own those jobs and they don't own the private sector. And the presidents of these labor unions do not actually own the labor union. So that's why you need to have a change of management. It's just like the presidency of the United States. That's why we vote for a new president, or we vote again every 4 years, and then the maximum term is 2 terms, which is a max of 8 years. Unfortunately, this guy has been in there since 1988 with this trade union, and I think that's one reason why they had problems with discrimination. So hold on just a moment. Let me get a drink of water. So we will just discuss I would say the age discrimination is what they went to court on, or what they were taken to court about. This was back in 2005, and they lost, and they rightfully lost on that. So interesting about that. So I'm not surprised that they actually got taken to court. I'm just surprised they weren't taken to court sooner, because more than likely, what you have to remember with court cases is that the offense typically did not happen just recently. And especially in regards to workplace violations, typically those, usually they came to light a ways back, but management and HR did not want to handle it. So I'm not surprised that this organization was taken to federal court and they lost. And they rightfully lost. They deserve to be told differently about how they were operating their organization there. So needless to say, they are affiliated with the AFL-CIO. It says the Seafarers International Union, also known as SIU, is an organization of 12 labor unions of mariners, fishermen, and boatmen working aboard vessels flagged in the United States or Canada. Michael Sacco, SACCO, has been its president since 1988. My personal opinion is that is way too long. He should have a maximum of serving 8 years. That's my personal opinion. get some new blood in there. The organization has an estimated 35,498 members and is the largest maritime labor organization in the United States. But that's only because they have several smaller labor unions under their, I would say within the organization, underneath their umbrella. So it's like a conglomerate. And I don't like that because, conglomerates and especially monopolies, well, let me rephrase that. Conglomerates do not always have the individual person's best interest at heart. It's always the group. And so whenever you're focusing on the group and not the individual, then that's when typically your rights get violated, which is exactly what happened within this trade union. Also, monopolies are illegal in the United States. At least they are supposed to be illegal. So I don't understand why these labor unions are not broken up. Because we have seen time and time again, whenever these labor unions get too big for their britches, so to speak, that's when they have a lot of problems. That's why, if I am in favor of a trade union, I prefer that they stay small and that they remain local because then they can protect local workers' rights. It's only when they get really big that they start having problems and then they start donating possibly millions of dollars to the Democratic Party, which is not right to do that. So that's a very fascist, communist thing to do. Goes on to say, organizers founded the union on October 14th, 1938, but again, their history goes back to the turn of the century. The Seafarers International Union arose from a charter issued to the Sailors Union of the Pacific by the American Federation of Labor as a foil against loss of jobs to the Congress of Industrial Organizations, also known as CIO. So they're having a turf battle, basically. They're having a tiff, and it's Communist Party-aligned factions. So what's interesting is that a lot of these labor unions have a problem with communism, which is not surprising considering that they typically cannot stand capitalism, but yet they want to make a lot of money. And yet they don't understand economics. They don't understand supply and demand, but yet they want a lot of money to do the exact same type of work. And it's like, that doesn't really make sense. But anyway, it says, today the SIU represents mariners and boatmen who sail aboard U.S. flagged vessels in deep sea, the Great Lakes, and inland waterways. Membership includes workers in the deck, steward, and engine departments. SIU members are represented aboard a wide variety of vessels operated by the United States Department of Defense's Military Sealift Command, also known as MSC, which provide a key source of jobs for seafarers. MSC operates some 110 non-combat ships that support U.S. forces around the world. SIU membership includes eligibility for access to healthcare, retirement, and education benefits, but it is predominantly about healthcare and retirement, and considering how large the baby boomer generation is, I bet this labor union is being sucked dry by the baby boomers in regards to retirement, but they were promised that they were promised that retirement benefit. So they should receive it, but I doubt that they can actually afford it. It kind of sounds like Medicare and Medicaid, which is exactly what it is. It's almost like a social welfare program. It says educational facilities include the union's Paul Hall Center for Maritime Training and Education at Piney Point, Maryland. The training center started in Brooklyn, New York, and is named after a former SIU president, Paul Hall. The school opened in 1967 and has trained more than 100,000 mariners. Highly active in the political arena, which I do not agree with, the SIU states that its primary focus is to maintain safe working environments for men and women working aboard vessels. I'm all for that, but I just don't agree with the politicalness. I think that's ridiculous. And to ensure very high standards of training among its membership. So I'm all for training, but what's funny is that this union discriminated against anybody over the age of 35. That's why they were taken to court. So I guess they consider anyone over the age of 35 to be an old hag or an old bag. And I'm like, wow, that's really horrible. So needless to say, very interesting stuff there. Let me get a drink of water. So it says, in terms of their history, again, it goes back to 1938. But again, it's actually back to the turn of the century. And a lot of their jobs were created, well, I shouldn't say created. The union was founded during the difficult times of the Great Depression and the world economic slowdown. And unfortunately, communism was on the rise back then. So that's why a lot of these labor unions were founded, was because we had a lot of communists that immigrated over here to the United States and did not agree with democracy, liberty, or freedom. So that's why they founded a lot of these labor unions. Now, here's the thing. I'm not going to go into every single little tiff that they've had. But needless to say, it's one of those things where they get affiliated, then disaffiliate, affiliate, then disaffiliate. And so I'm going to list off the unions that they are currently affiliated with, and this changes. It just changes so much, it's ridiculous. Like they get in a little tiff and they leave and then they come back, so it's dumb. Okay, so the first one that is involved in this labor union is the Seafarers International Union of North America, Atlantic, Gulf, Lakes, and Inland Waters District National Maritime Union. And their total assets is $19,368,333, and that is as of 2005 report. The next one is American Maritime Officers. Their total assets is $15,228,913, and that is as of a 2006 report. So these people are not broke, is what I'm trying to make a point here. They have millions of dollars that they collect from their members. And they try and infiltrate our elections, and that's not right. Because the elections belong to the American people. It does not belong to any particular trade union. That's why these trade unions are very communist in how they operate, because they think that they should be in charge of who becomes president. Well, that's a dictatorship, and we don't have that. The next one on the list is Fishermen's Union of America, Pacific, and Caribbean. Their total assets as of 2005 is $10,525. Next one is Industrial Professional Technical Workers International Union. Their total assets in 2005 was $416,930. The next one is Marine Firemen's Union. Their total assets in 2005 was $3,675,662. The next one is Sailors Union of the Pacific. Their total assets in 2005 was $2,811,294. The next one is Seafarers Entertainment and Allied Trades Union. Their total assets from 2005 was $195,316. The next one is Seafarers International Union of Canada. Their total assets, it's unknown. I don't have that information. Next one is Seafarers International Union of Puerto Rico, Caribbean, and Latin America. Their total assets in a 2005 report was $252,361. Next one is Seafarers Maritime Union. Their total assets in a 2005 report was $1,200,432. The next one is Sugar Workers Union number 1. Their total assets in a 2005 report was $280,209. The next and last one that is affiliated within this organization is United Industrial Service Transportation Professional and Government Workers of North America, a big old long title, and we don't have their total assets for this report. But the unions that have disaffiliated are Seafarers Professional Security Officers Association, and their affiliation was terminated in 2004. The next one is Seafarers AFL-CIO Local Union number 5, Chauffeurs and Industrial Workers, and their contract or affiliation was terminated in the year 2000. The next one is Seafarers AFL-CIO Local Union 300, United Industrial Workers, Midwest. Their contract or affiliation was terminated in the year 2000. The next and last one is Seafarers AFL-CIO Local Union Marine Staff Officers Pacific District, big old long title. Their contract or affiliation was terminated in the year 2002. Now here's the thing. Canada is not a big fan of this labor union. So one of the first things that happened, this first part has nothing to do with Canada, it's the second part that does. So in 2005, the SIU and the Paul Hall Center for Maritime Training and Education, they were sued for age discrimination by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I bet that shocked them because that's a federal agency. So they don't expect the federal government to ever call them out on anything, and the federal government did, thank goodness. The SIU was restricting applicants based on age rather than ability, rejecting any apprentice applicants over the age of 35. So again, I guess they consider anyone over the age of 35 an old hag and an old bag, and that's just dumb. In the opinion of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, it says, quote, throughout this appeal and in the proceedings before the district court, the center and the union maintained that age barriers to entry are a hallmark of apprenticeships and complained that the EEOC's regulation effectively guts that employment practice by erasing its defining characteristics. So here's the thing. It's like I was saying earlier. Just because a court case comes out in the year 2005, that doesn't mean that the offense occurred only recently. More than likely, it had been going on since the beginning of this labor union. So this entity that was supposedly trying to protect workers' rights and claiming to care about people, it actually did not. And someone finally took them to court. Amen. They should have been taken to court, and they should have been taken to court a long time ago. And it says in 2006, the case remanded back to the Baltimore Federal District Court, and that court ruled in favor of the EEOC and ordered back payments in the range of, get this, $2 million to over 180 plaintiffs, and further ordered that they and all future applicants to the Paul Hall Maritime School be admitted regardless of age. So get this, over 180 plaintiffs sued these people. So that means it's a minimum of 180 people sued them. That is really sad. That is very sad, because that means they have a big problem with age discrimination, and it's been going on a long time. Now, in regards to Canada, this is very interesting here. It says, in testimony before the Parliament of Canada in 1996, David Broadfoot of the Canadian Merchant Navy Association recalled that in 1946, quote, our government imported a thug, a real heavy-duty gangster from Brooklyn, Hal C. Banks, to smash our union and bring in the Seafarers International Union, which was no different from the Teamsters, which that says a lot because the Teamsters are not nice, which was no different than the Teamsters at its worst and no different from the Longshoremen's Association at its best. Now remember, longshoremen, they're not a good union either, so they're kind of bad crooks. It says, or he says, they came on our ships with baseball bats and bicycle chains. That's how they introduced their union to Canada. So now I'm starting to understand why Canada does not always like the United States and why they do not always like Americans. It's because of things like this. And unfortunately, sometimes organizations like this that are from America, they do bad things, but they make the entire country look bad. And I think that sucks because, I would say that the majority of Americans would not be for this labor union, and they would not be for those other ones that we listed, because a lot of them were founded by fascists. Meaning, they do not believe in America, they do not believe in capitalism, they do not believe in democracy. And an example of this, just right off the top of my head, this Michael Sacco guy, he's been president of their organization since 1988. That is a long time to be president of an organization. Long time, way too long. So obviously this union does not believe in democracy. It does not believe in freedom because they can't even get new blood in there to lead their organization in the right direction. And I wonder, how much their president knew about age discrimination, because this guy has been in office since 1988. But yet they were not taken to court, until 2005. So again, even the federal court said, hey, this age discrimination is basically a founding pillar in your organization. It's just something that is considered part of everyday living within this organization. Like, it's just considered normal, even though it violates federal labor laws and also state laws. See, labor unions like this, they do not understand or agree with democracy. That's why they give to the Democratic Party, and that's why they typically are Democrat, liberal, progressives. They're typically not conservatives. They're not Republicans. It's because they think their union is more important than the rest of the United States. And they also think that their union and their union members are more important than the rest of Americans, and that's not true. See, this is why they don't really believe in equality. And it took the EEOC to call them out on it. I think that's really sad, that it got that bad, that a federal agency had to pump the brake and say, hey, this is a violation of federal law. I mean, just think about this. This court case, it happened in 2005. But that age discrimination, it had been going on for decades, I bet. And here's the thing. They could have stopped doing that a long time ago. Like the moment someone started being discriminated against, they should have fired the manager that was doing that. Like all they had to do was handle it within their organization. But here's the thing. A lot of these trade unions are very much a bureaucracy. So good luck getting rid of people that are causing the problem. Like this is an HR nightmare, going to court like this. And here's the sad thing. That $2 million, those are union dues that members paid. And so now they're having to pay out, or they did have to pay out, all this money to the victims of age discrimination because their very trade union totally oppressed people and suppressed them based on their age. It's ridiculous. It's just like, to me, there's no excuse to have any type of discrimination. Because there's always a policy and procedure in place to follow. But they did not do this. And the reason why they did not do this is because they're fascist, communist, socialist, liberal, and progressive. See, they claim to be inclusive. See, that's the lie behind trade unions. They claim to be inclusive, but they are not. See, inclusivism says, hey, we welcome you no matter what. In regards to trade unions, more than likely it would be like, okay, you are welcome no matter what, except for you have to meet these criteria, which is about safety and health and things of that nature. So they were discriminating against these applicants outside of the normal guidelines. And this is supposed to be a trade union that values workers' rights, that values a person's livelihood, that values someone being able to earn a living for themselves and or their family members. Like it's so hypocritical. But at the same time, I'm not surprised. Because a lot of these trade unions, they're communist, fascist, socialist, progressive, and liberal, and a lot of them are founded by fascists, so they are not pro-America, they are not pro-democracy, they are not pro-capitalism. They are against all of that. But yet they love money and they want money. See, here's the thing. I'm all for people landing a great contract and having a wonderful bargaining agreement. But here's the thing. You cannot be for making good money, and you cannot be for having a really good job or a secure job and be against capitalism and be against democracy and be against our labor laws and be against the United States and go against the Constitution of the United States, which is exactly what this labor union did. It's ridiculous. It's just like, okay, this trade union, it is so typical of them because they have a love of money, which is technically the root of all evil, but they have a love of money, but yet they want to destroy the very system that helps them make a lot of money. Now, does that make sense? I think we can agree, no, it does not make sense. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, it's just bizarre, right? It's very bizarre. Because who in their right mind slaps the hand that's feeding them? You know what I mean? Like, it just makes no sense. What's interesting is that trade unions, they are so stuck in shaming and blaming and living in this constant false victimhood. They have this theme that they live by, that they're the victim because they're the worker. And it's like, okay, if you're a worker, you're not a victim unless you are a victim of a crime or a victim of a circumstance that happened and you can report it. But they just live in this victim mentality all the time, even though a lot of these trade unions, a lot of their members make way more money than the average American worker, which is ridiculous. It's like, how can you complain when you have it so good? And I'll close with this. An example of this is, for example, the NFL athletes, these football players. They complain about discrimination and racism and all this stuff. I'm like, really? Like, most of those guys are millionaires. They make above and beyond what the average American makes per day, per month, per year, per lifetime. And then they have the nerve to complain about their wages, their salary, their work environment. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And yet, NFL players are now protected by a trade union of their own. What's interesting is that I don't ever hear baseball players complain about discrimination. I just don't hear that. I don't hear them complaining about the work environment. I don't hear them complaining about the Pledge of Allegiance, or not the Pledge of Allegiance, although that would be awesome if they actually said the Pledge of Allegiance at every game. I never hear baseball players complain about the national anthem. It's always been my impression that baseball players are way more American or diplomatic, and they're way more. They just have more of a authentic Americanism about them, especially with the sport, because baseball is, it's still considered, I guess, America's pastime. And what's interesting is that baseball players, they don't have as many scandals as NFL players do. There's not as much domestic violence. There's not as much baby daddies. There's not as much skankness. There's not as much, I would say, drug issues. There's just not as much drunk driving like NFL players. They've got some serious behavior problems. NFL, baseball players, there are some that have behavior problems, but it's like way less. It is way less. Like their players are definitely more normal. And later on in this podcast, we will discuss the different sports or athletic trade unions, because they're very interesting as well. But I'm just noticing that, the NFL, their players, their athletes, they're kind of fascist in a way. They're not as bad as these people that founded these labor unions at the turn of the century. But, these NFL players, they're not really pro-America. Because I'm like, how can you complain about an industry that pays you millions of dollars a year and then claim that America is racist? It's like, if America was racist, nobody that's black would ever be a multimillionaire. No one that's African American would ever be an athlete on a team. It would all be white people. Like if America was truly racist, black people would be banned from the NFL. Black people would be banned from the Olympics. Black people, would be banned from baseball or softball. Just think about every sport that is in the United States. If America was truly racist, you would only see white people. You would only see white athletes, but you don't see that. The NFL is a great, I think, a great testimony to the fact that America is not racist, because the majority of athletes within the NFL are African American. Like the white guys in the NFL, they are totally outnumbered. Totally. And a lot of the white guys, typically they don't make as much money as the black guys. Like, is that discrimination? Like, I don't hear, white athletes complaining about that. I mean, it's just like, I just feel like sometimes people, I hate to say this, I just feel like sometimes people are so ungrateful that they don't realize just how good they have it here in the United States. They just don't realize it. And perfect examples of this, are overpaid athletes, unappreciative athletes, and labor unions and trade unions. They're just some of the most ungrateful people that I see on this. It's just like, I just don't get how anyone could say that America is racist. I just don't get that. And I don't get how anyone can be against capitalism, but yet live here in the United States. It's like, well, if you are truly against capitalism and you hate it, then why do you live here? Well, you live here because you want more money. And guess what? It's only under capitalism and democracy that you actually have the ability to make as much money as you want. Pretty much in any other country, you don't have that leisure and you don't have that ability, because almost every other country does not have a clue how to protect citizens' rights and their freedoms. Because if a citizen's rights and their freedoms are not protected, then you don't have a democracy, and you don't even have a chance of having capitalism. I mean, what's so sad? I think all of us really want to believe that trade unions are good and they care about people, and that they supposedly care more about people than just the employer. But the more we look at these trade unions, the more I see a common thread. They only care about the few. So they play favoritism and nepotism. And then anybody that is not their favorite, they discriminate against. It's ridiculous. And this labor union actually got taken to court over it and had to pay out $2 million. See, here's the thing. If I had been a member of this labor union and I knew that they were going to have to pay $2 million out because of discrimination, I would actually be really mad about that. Because, the way I think about it is, hey, that's my money I've been paying in union dues. I would be offended as a member. I really would. Because I'd be like, okay, so maybe if you guys had not been practicing age discrimination, then maybe, we could have saved $2 million here. And you know what it reminds me of in regards to this? It reminds me of the age discrimination that was rampant in the airline industry back in the day. Back in the day, women, the moment they turned like 32 or 35, they were automatically terminated in the airline industry because they were considered old, they weren't considered desirable, and then also the moment a woman got married, she was fired from the airline industry. It was just expected. That's what this labor union reminds me of. And what's interesting is that it was airline stewardesses that actually went to the EEOC and reported the entire airline industry for the rampant and widespread age discrimination. And also, there was discrimination against women. And then there was also discrimination against blacks and Asians in the airline industry. And here's another example where if it wasn't for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, we would probably still be experiencing discrimination within that whole industry. And I think that's really sad. But here's the thing. It's important to remember that if all you ever keep is a bad mold, like you never break the bad mold, then how can you ever expect to have something better? See, because here's the thing. Those executives and those people that were in charge of those airlines and that were not doing the grunt work, I guarantee you they would not have liked being discriminated against. They would not like getting fired, the moment they turn 32 or 35 or the moment their wife has a baby or something. Like, here's the thing. A unlawful firing is just that. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. A unlawful firing is just that. It's unlawful. And it's really sad those things actually took place. Because, I look at it this way. What if the airline industry had actually valued women for who they are and what they are? The airline industry actually could have been a lot better a lot sooner if that discrimination had not been taking place. But it was just assumed back then, during the nuclear family years, or whatever, that a woman's place is either in the kitchen or in the bedroom. And it's just like, wow, so we don't have a brain. Thanks a lot. That's why women got so mad in the 50s, 60s, and especially the 70s. I think if women had not been so mistreated and so discriminated against, I think the feminist movement might have calmed down a lot sooner as opposed to being so liberal and crazy progressive today. It's ridiculous. Like, I'm all for the old school feminist movement, which definitely protects workers' rights for females, but now feminism has gone off the rails and is now trying to say that transgenders are women. And I'm like, they're not. If a man is a man, he's a man. Like, transgenders, they're, what's interesting or sad, I should say, what's sad about transgenders is that they're not male or female. Now they're in the middle because they're living basically in two different types of bodies, which is why that's called, dysphoria. I think that's one of the words for it. Meaning it's a psychological issue. It's not normal to think that way. It's not normal to live that way. But yet, feminists these days, a lot of them are very much embracing transgenderism and making it seem like, oh, that's a women's rights issue. No, it's not. Should transgenders be treated with dignity and respect? Yes, by all means. Love them, respect them, treat them with dignity and respect. It is within that same token that just because you love and respect somebody, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them or you tolerate the strange things that they do or the things that they want to do. And one of the things that transgenders want to do is they want to lower the age of consent, especially homosexual males. So here's the thing. How the feminist movement went from fighting for groups like flight attendants and helping them to be seen as equal to men and to not be fired for their age, their sex, or for marriage or for childbearing, how that now incorporates transgenderism and the LGBTQ community, I don't get it because that's sexist. Like, I don't think feminists realize that, yet again, you are allowing men to dominate you and your organization. That's what transgender men are. They are homosexual men that are trying to dominate the world of women. And it's like, or the world that we live in per se, and what we go through. Like, I remember working in retail years ago, this was years and years ago, and, you know, I worked in cosmetics, and I didn't think I never thought I would meet homosexuals in that field. I just didn't think that I would. I thought cosmetics was for women, excuse me. I can't tell you how many bizarre homosexual men I met in the cosmetic department that were makeup artists and or they were sales associates, and you know what? They did everything they could, a lot of them, they did everything they could to make women miserable that they worked with. They would do everything they could to be flamboyant and to be more feminine than an actual woman, and it was just so weird. Like, it's even hard to discuss it. Like, I'm getting tongue-tied. I'm just like, what in the world? But, you know, as a young person, and I'm still young, but as a younger person, I should say, it took me aback because I wasn't expecting that. Like, I just thought their behavior was so odd because there was always a scene. There was always a problem. There was always drama. It was always something did not make sense. And I can't tell you how many times I had to go to my manager and be like, I don't know what this guy is doing. I don't understand why he's causing a problem on the floor. Like, this is some of the strange things he's saying and doing. I was like, can you help me out here? Like, I've never worked with someone this weird. And so the manager, you know, would be like, he said and did what? I was like, this is what happened. Like, you know, homosexual men that try and outdo women, you know, let me just say it up front. You can never outdo a woman because we are actually born a woman, you are not. So let me clear the air there on that. You know, and I think a lot of these homosexual men that are very flamboyant, I've never met a happy one, and I think they have very miserable lives, at least the ones I've worked with. Like, there was always a problem, there was always an issue, there was always drama, and they would always have their boyfriends come visit them at work, and it's like, we can't keep having these weird domestic fights at work. It was weird. And it was just bizarre. It's like, you know, like, I really wish homosexual men would leave the feminist things to women because we are the ones who are feminine, you are not. Like we are the ones that are born female, you are not. And I'm not saying that men can't be effeminate or be kind of feminine in how they are, because there are some straight guys, there are actually several straight guys I've met over the years that they're feminine to a little bit, you know, because they're not like crazy hillbillies, or they're not, you know, lumberjacks, or maybe they're not football players, you know, they're not extremely masculine, but they're not extremely feminine. They're just kind of there in the middle, but they're straight and they love women and they want to get married and have children, things like that. But it's just one of those things like, you know, these homosexual guys, I don't understand how feminists or how women can fall for this. Like, they are not for you, they're actually against you. Like, take a look at what all the feminist movement fought for. Like, you know, the feminist movement did not fight for the rights of homosexuals. Like, you know, homosexual men were not experiencing discrimination like, you know, like what women were. It just amazes me what stuff has happened and what has come full circle. And what I don't understand is feminists taking on I would say the banner or the problems or the burden of the transgender community, and that's not our issue, that's not our problem. Women are women, men are men. Transgenders, a transgender male or a transgender female, they're right there in the middle. They have their own little group, and it is a little group because it's not very many people in the United States, or much less on the planet, that are transgender. It's actually quite rare. So if they're not the majority, why would you bring so much attention to them? I don't get that, because a lot of what they want to do is not right. And they actually have been causing a lot of problems in the private sector, especially at places of employment. So very similar to these different trade unions. I mean, there was one guy I worked with, and I'll close with this. He was a manager of a makeup counter that was directly across from me. He was notorious for coming over into our makeup bay and stealing from our samples. And we had some very expensive cosmetics. I mean, very couture, very European. His stuff was crappy American goods. And it was, not that everything in America is crappy, but his was crappy. It was, a lousy American company that was making these cosmetics. And he had to sell that. And then, me and a couple other ladies, we were selling more of the European line. Well, whenever he wanted to schmooze, some clients or some customers, he just told his employees to come over and get samples from us. It's no, our samples are for people that buy this product. Your product is American. They're not purchasing our products here. So, no, you're not getting any samples. So what I started doing is I started counting every single sample that we got. And I started counting every little thing and keeping inventory, because one reason why we were not getting our shipments was because we had a huge problem in loss prevention, or lack of loss prevention. We had a lot of pilfering, so to speak. And so that's one reason why I was hired and why I was transferred to that makeup counter, was to investigate what was going on and to stop the problem and to report to management what was going on. So every day that I worked and every night that I closed, I would do an inventory of every single sample and every single product that we had, and I'd make sure it matched our inventory the next day. Well, get this. The people that were stealing from us, stealing from our bay, they hated it when I would count stuff. It would take well over an hour, but I would stay and I would do it. And I got really quick and really good at it. But, what's interesting is that the only people that got mad at me about that were the people that were stealing from us. And here's the thing. There were so many homosexual men that loved to come into the store and get all these freebies. Because they're cheap. These homosexual men, they were cheap, and they thought they didn't have to pay for anything because they thought that they were more feminine than an actual woman, like someone that is actually born a woman. It made no sense to me. There's so many homosexual men that they're freeloaders, especially when they work in the cosmetic industry and they work as makeup artists. That was my impression. And I never knew that. I learned all this stuff. I was like, wow, I've never met so many freeloaders and drama queens in all my life. And here's the thing, management, they were shocked at how much these guys were stealing from our bay. Because I would report it. And this guy that was a makeup counter manager, he should have never been in management. Never, never, never. You couldn't trust him with money or samples or anything. He actually told me off one time. I know he wanted to tell me off way more. But how did he describe it? He said that I falsely accused him of stealing from my bay. And I said, I didn't falsely accuse you. I reported the numbers. The numbers speak for themselves. And the security department, they have footage of who goes behind the counter here, and they have, actual eyes on this counter. And they're watching everything. So if management is coming to you and they're saying that they've seen you take stuff from our makeup counter, that's not me saying that. That's the numbers, and that is security. And here's the thing. Our security that worked at this store, they were off-duty police officers. Like, why would they lie about this? You know what I mean? Like it was just so weird that this homosexual guy, he was just like in la land, and he just thought that he should be able to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, however he wants. Like, he did not understand, that stealing is stealing and thievery is thievery. He did not understand economics. He did not understand supply and demand. Oh, and also he did not understand that he was breaking the law. But yet, the feminist movement and stupid feminists, they defend guys like this. They go, oh, well, he knows what he's doing because he's gay, so just give him all the samples he wants. No, we're not doing that. Like, a lot of the women I worked with, they wanted to tell this guy and these other guys no, but they didn't have the courage to do so. I did. I told them no all the time. And I stood there and said, no. You're not getting anything out of us. If your client wants a sample, they have to buy from us. Like, they have to come to us because we need to inform them about this product. Because we don't want them to have, a possible allergic reaction. Like, we have our clientele, you have your clientele. And plus your clientele, I've never seen any of them come over to our bay and buy our expensive European couture skincare. Because your clientele typically can't afford anything over $50. One of our creams costs $350. So obviously, there's definitely a different demographic here. But needless to say, this gay guy, he did everything he could to try and get me in trouble with management. I can only imagine what would happen if I was going through that same thing, but during today's turbulence in our society. See, back then, managers were smart enough to realize, hey, there's a certain group of people that keeps coming in and stealing from our store. And it's connected to this gay guy that is a manager at a catty corner makeup counter. Something fishy's going on. Man, if you were to investigate a homosexual manager these days, oh my gosh, there would be a lawsuit, there would be a gay pride parade that would, march through or stomp through the makeup counter department, through the cosmetic department. I mean, it would be such, it would be like the stuff hits the fan, as they say. Like, I know that is exactly what would happen if that same situation happened today. So I'm grateful that what happened to me happened many years ago and is not happening today. But I feel sorry for anyone that has to report anyone that's in the LGBTQ community, even though it has nothing to do with their sexuality. Like, you're actually reporting them for the stuff that they're doing that's wrong. But see, here's the thing, the LGBTQ community, because they've gotten the alliance of the feminist movement, now they get away with way more stuff. And sometimes it is discrimination against women. I kid you not, folks, I was discriminated against on a daily basis by these homosexual makeup artists. I was discriminated against for being a straight woman. And these gay guys could not stand it whenever a very good-looking heterosexual man would be hitting on me. And then they would try and, interfere in the conversation and then hit on the guy. And the guy is heterosexual. He's straight. He's disgusted by this guy hitting on him. And he would just look at him and be like, dude, back off. It was so weird. And I have to say, sir, I'm sorry about that. I apologize for his behavior. I don't know what's going on with him. It just is what it is. And usually the guy that's hitting on me would say, don't worry about it. It kind of looks like a funky work environment anyway. But these gay guys, they can't stand it when straight women get a really good looking straight guy. They can't stand it. So it's like, I don't understand how feminists can very much try and protect the LGBTQ community. Because you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of this labor union, the SIU, the Seafarers International Union of North America. It reminds me of them in regards to protecting the very people in their trade union that were discriminating against people based on their age. You know, to protect something that's wrong, it's wrong. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, why, you know, if you're going to protect something that's good and true and has morals and values and that, you know, actually helps our country and actually unites our country, not divide it. See, people don't understand that trade unions are very similar to the LGBTQ community in that they are very divisive. And see, that's how they're able to get away with so much stuff, because they cause so much division. People don't realize, you know, what's going on. Like, they don't realize what the true intention is of that division. So needless to say, you know, over time, we have definitely learned a lot about these trade unions, in that the way that they are predominantly very successful is they cause division within this country. They don't unify it. They cause division. You know, in case these trade unions are not aware, the name of this country is called the United States. Not the separate states, the United States. That's what makes our country so good, is that we are united, and that we believe in one another, and that we love one another. You know, love doesn't have to be this sicky sweet, you know, fake stuff, because that's not what love is. Love is where, you know, I actually want what is best for you. It doesn't mean I have to like you, but if I truly love someone, then I want what is best for them, even regardless of our differences, regardless of our opinions. You know, regardless of our different walks in life, if I love somebody, I want what is best for them always. But trade unions and the LGBTQ community, they don't really love people, because they believe in division. And then if you don't go along with them, oh my goodness, they throw a hissy fit. A hissy fit. And all the news media outlets love to cover that, because they love a story. Even if it's not true, or even if it's ridiculous, or even if it's just anti-American. I mean, if anything, I think a lot of our news organizations, I think they love it when a story goes against America. So what does that tell you about our current news organizations? Like, they're very anti-America. Well, think about who's anti-America. Communists, fascists, socialists, liberals, and progressives. Like, do we really want that? I mean, think about it. You know, would it hurt to actually love and value your country? No. Would it hurt to actually value and love one another? No. Would it hurt to respect and honor one another? No. All those things I just mentioned are things that we are actually supposed to be doing as a country and as a human race. But if you go with what a trade union or the LGBTQ community wants to do, because they're very similar in how they operate, they don't want any of those good things to happen. Because they know that if we are unified, their little mission basically becomes obsolete. Because when we are unified in dignity, respect, love, honor, you know, we win every single time. And the reason why we win every single time in that nature is because we are one nation under God. What's interesting about these trade unions and the LGBTQ community, they don't want you to really know that God exists. They don't want you to believe that God exists. And they want you to question everything that actually you might believe in. Because if you don't believe in what they're doing, then, oh, you're against them. And that's not the case. See, that's division. That's not unity. Give me unity any day. Because under unity, people tend to want what is best for each other. It's not just about me. And we do matter as an individual. Like, my rights matter, your rights matter. But when we come together as one, you know, one nation, and when we come together as one people, there's nothing that we can't accomplish. We can accomplish all things. Why? Because we actually value human life. But if we are not unified, in any way, shape, or form, then technically we have nothing. And it's easy for things to get lost in the shuffle because, you know, That's what division loves to do. Division loves to scatter. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me how in the Bible, in the New Testament, Jesus talks about scattered sheep and how they need a shepherd. I think that's very telling here in the United States. Sometimes I feel like our country, instead of being unified, we're like scattered sheep. And truly, Jesus Christ is our shepherd. He really is. See, because here's the thing. If you don't have Jesus, you don't have anything. That might ruffle some feathers, but let me put it this way. Why would you make anybody God, or why would you worship anything other than God? I just don't get that. See, what labor unions and the LGBTQ community love to do, they love to try to get people to believe that there is no God, or that you should question your belief system. And the reason why is because they want to dethrone the God that you actually value and worship in your life, so that way they can place something else of importance in your life that they can control, so that way they can control you and your life and your lifestyle and your family. It really is about manipulation and control, but it's almost in reverse, I would say. See, the more I hear people talk about, we are inclusive, I'm like, really? How are you inclusive? Show me. And I've yet to find an organization that is truly inclusive, but yet they have a inclusiveness policy in their office culture, manifesto or their HR manual or policy. I'm like, you know what? I just find that odd. Because what's really strange about our society right now in America, I have found that the more people claim they are inclusive, actually the more division there is. This country was more unified, when our grandparents were alive. And they never talked about being inclusive. They just respected their neighbor. I mean, they just, loved one another. Even if they couldn't stand someone, they still loved them as a human being. And I'm not saying that our grandparents' generation didn't have problems. It did. I mean, there were definitely some problems with sexism and racism and things like that. But strangely, even with those problems, the United States was better off back then. And I'm not saying to bring any of those bad things back. I'm saying that even though our nation had its problems, we were more unified because more people believed in God, they worshiped God, and less people followed or worshipped a false doctrine, especially a political doctrine. I just find that to be odd because what's interesting is that our country is very ungodly considering, what we used to be, but supposedly we have more freedom. Women supposedly have equal pay. We really don't. Supposedly, there's only racism against blacks. That's not true. I've been discriminated against I don't know how many times because of my skin color. I've been discriminated against because of my marital status, my skin color. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, where I'm from. Like there have been times I've had job interviews with companies in California and they would not hire me because I'm from Oklahoma. Not because of location, it might be kind of hard for you to move here. Actually, no, it's not. You just pick up and move. I mean, you can go anywhere in this world. But there are so many employers in California, or people in California, I should say, they look down on the rest of the United States and they view us as like hicks. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. I don't understand that thinking. I just don't get it. But then when I take a look at, how does the Democratic Party operate? Oh, well, they're snobs, a lot of them. They think Republicans and conservatives that we're all stupid hicks and we live in the woods. We don't. Okay, not all of us. In fact, that's very much a majority that do that. Then you have people from California that, they think that the rest of us are just ignorant. And it's like, wow, your state is bankrupt. It's broke. And people are leaving California, they are flooding out of California because they can't afford to live there. But yet California is Democrat, it's socialist, it's progressive, it's liberal. It has way too many social reform programs. It has a bizarre governor, a really strange guy. They very much believe in abortion. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I just don't understand that thinking that, oh, we're inclusive, but let's get rid of the unborn. See, that's the lie of the political left. They claim, oh, we are the inclusive party. You know, we respect people. The conservatives do not. Well, you know what? I'm pretty sure it's only the conservatives and the Republicans in this country that are actually doing everything they can to protect the family, the normal family, which is one man, one woman, married. And it is Republicans that are protecting the unborn. So technically, it is the Republican Party that is inclusive. It's not the Democratic Party. If anything, the Democratic Party very much shames and blames other people. We don't do that. We just don't. Like, I have never met a Republican. I cannot think of a single Republican that has ever said, oh, you can't be in our party because of blah, blah, blah. Or if you're not with us, you're against us. I've never heard that. All the years I've been Republican, which will be 20 years now, I've never heard that. You would think that if Republicans are really like that, and if that is widespread, I would have heard about it by now, because in 2 decades I've been Republican, I've never heard that. But yet, Democrats and liberals, oh my gosh, whenever I meet someone that is Democrat or liberal, it's just this non-stop lecture about environmentalism, your carbon footprint, feminism, intersectionality, critical race theory, you know, I'm an idiot, they're not, I must be a money-grabbing person because I actually believe in making money. It's like, wow, no, like you actually deserve the wages that you earn. That doesn't mean that you're grabbing money, it means you're earning money. Like you deserve to earn what you work for. That's called a wage. You know, what's interesting is that Democrats, they very much want to raise taxes on people. And it's like, wow, so they're basically punishing people for earning a wage that they actually worked for. But yet, we actually have federal laws about wages. And we also have another department that's about, I think it's called the Department of Labor. I mean, it's just this constant hypocrisy. And what's sad is that this hypocrisy, sometimes it's hard to say all this stuff, but it's just like, because it just boggles my mind, but this hypocrisy is rampant in these trade unions. Because they claim to care about people, they claim to be inclusive, but yet here they are practicing discrimination. And it took taking them to federal court, you know, to get them to stop, when they could have stopped years ago. I mean, it's just like, wow. So the very so-called institutions of trade unions that claim to care about workers' rights and all this stuff, it's a lie. It's a lie. Do they do some good? Yes, but they do a whole lot worse now. Like they do more bad things now than good. You know, let me put it this way. And I'll close with this. And I realize I've said that for the 3rd time now. But I really will close on this. You know, what's interesting about trade unions is that if everybody in the United States that works in the private sector, if all of our jobs were connected to a trade union, guess what? None of us would be rich. No one would ever move up. Everybody would either be lower income or middle class. We would have I would say we would not have any billionaires. We would have very few millionaires. And, you know, we would be stuck in the past just like the Soviet Union was for decade after decade. Because trade unions are very much like the Soviets. They don't like change. They don't welcome it. They don't like being questioned. And if you do question them, oh, how dare you question me? How dare you? How dare you want a cheaper product, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer? How dare you want to save money? Don't you care about my wages? See, here's the thing. If everybody worked for a trade union, our country would be screwed. We would not have, first of all, we would not have democracy. We would not have liberty. We would not have freedom. And if trade unions were in charge of all labor, we would not have freedom of speech. Well, there's a federal offense right there. Thank goodness for the Constitution of the United States, right? Also, this would affect property rights. Because whenever you have institutions that control all labor, it basically forms a dictatorship, whether people realize it or not. But under that type of, I would say, authoritarianism, you have basically no ownership of property. Because everybody works in the same industry and everybody should make the same amount of money, so then how can anybody ever have a nicer house or a nicer car? Also, if everybody worked for a trade union, our healthcare system would totally suck. It would be worse than socialized medicine. I mean, we would go back to the Dark Ages. See, because here's the thing, it's only under capitalism and, I would say freedom of trade and a fair market that you actually have inventions and innovation and things get better, not worse, and things get better and not remain stagnant. See, trade unions, they don't like change. And the SIU is a perfect example of that because they were not going to stop discriminating against people based on age until a federal court passed a ruling. That's how stubborn these people are. And they don't think they have to listen to anybody. Why? Because they're a trade union. And they control a lot of contracts. They control a lot of bargaining agreements. They control a lot of people's wages, their benefits, their retirement. See, that's why these trade unions have too much power, especially a big one like this that is basically a conglomerate. What's interesting is that people they'll talk trash about a conglomerate that occurs or a merger that occurs in the private sector. And sometimes those mergers and conglomerates or buyouts are investigated by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. But here's the thing, labor unions do not get investigated, and they should. Because technically, they are trying to control business in the private sector. But yet they get away with so much because it's like, oh, we're for workers' rights. Really, which workers? Because you're playing favorites again. What else is new? See, to me, I find that to be bizarre that they claim to care about workers' rights, but when it comes down to it, trade unions are notorious for violating workers' rights. And also, they are notorious for trampling on workers' rights that are not in their labor union, meaning the rest of the United States, people that are not union jobs. See, if I had to guess, I bet a lot of these bargaining agreements cost way too much money and they greatly inflate the prices of goods. Here's another tidbit. If we all worked for a trade union, we would have constant inflation. Constant. We would never have a break, and our currency would be worthless because we would have a constant rate of inflation. That is exactly what happened in Germany after World War I, and especially after World War II. Their money was worthless. Is that what you want here in the United States? Like, here's the thing. People may not realize this, but you don't have to fight in a war to have inflation and for your currency to become worthless or to have less value. All you have to do is get a bunch of stupid people in charge of your country that don't understand supply and demand, they don't understand or agree with capitalism, they do not understand or agree with democracy, and they don't understand the private sector, but yet they want to suck it dry of all of its revenue via taxes. See, that's what trade unions love about the Democratic Party. Because they know the Democratic Party, whenever they get in power, they have a lot of nerve to tax the American people and to tax them highly. That's why trade unions are predominantly in the back pocket of the Democratic Party. That's why they're not for Republicans. That's why they're not for conservatives, because conservatives are for the American people. Conservatives cannot be bought. Democrats, oh, they can be bought. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'm not saying that corruption never happens in regards to Republicans, but the corruption rate is way higher and astronomical in the Democratic Party and those elected officials as opposed to Republicans. Because Republicans, we are very much capitalist because we understand that, hey, if you don't have money in your bank account and if you can't find a job, there's a big problem in this country. I'll give an example. Has anyone gone, like to McDonald's or Taco Bell and see how much their prices are now? Like so many of the McDonald's that I go to here in Oklahoma City, most of them don't have, how they used to have, you can buy a drink for $1 and it can be a large, it can be any size. It's no longer like that anymore. I think the only thing that costs $1 now is a small drink, a small soda or something. And they've gone up on the price of their combos. They've gone up on the price on their cookies and their desserts, like the Oreo McFlurry. Oh my goodness, it costs as much as like a Sonic Blast or something. It's ridiculous. It would be cheaper just to buy a bucket of ice cream and make it and mix it yourself. It's ridiculous. See, that's inflation. Inflation is not good for our country, but here's the thing. Trade unions, they do not understand economics. So even during times of inflation and, during tough times in terms of employment, trade unions are notorious for picketing, for having astronomical bargain agreements that are just not affordable, they're not reasonable, and if you don't give them what they want, oh, we're going to strike and we're not going to work. Well, thanks for causing yet another problem in the United States. You know what would be funny? Is if there is a TV show, I guess this is a TV pitch, but I think it would be really funny if there's a TV show that had a scenario where all American workers work for trade unions and all workers get pissed and refuse to go to work. Then no one would be at their job. No one. Everything would be empty. Grocery stores, hospitals, schools. Nobody would go to their job. You know what that reminds me of? Greece, Spain, and Portugal. Especially Greece. They are notorious for not going to work. Notorious. And that's why their country is bankrupt. And it has been bankrupt for a long time. And that's why the euro has been suffering for so many years, is because Greece does not exactly like to be honest about their books, about their banking system. So any country that is part of the euro in terms of that currency, they are having to pick up the slack because of Greece. I mean, I ask you, is that what you want for America? I would venture to say no. I would venture to say you don't want a country that's bankrupt and you don't want a currency that sucks, and you actually want people to show up to their job and do it well. I think that's being realistic. But again, I still think it would be really funny to have a show where the entire workforce in the United States is all working for different trade unions and everybody just up and walks out. Nothing would get done. I find that funny because that's how ridiculous trade unions are these days. Like, here's the thing. They're not unifiers. If they actually cared about unity, they would actually go to the bargaining table and participate in a normal agreement. And they would actually show up to their job. They would actually show up to work and not cause these problems. What might be interesting is to look up at all the different strikes that have happened since Biden has been president. I've come across a couple so far. And it's just like, wow. That's not being American to go on strike. It's just like, you know, let me give this example. What if you're on the operating table, your appendix has exploded, and the surgeon is right in the middle of removing your appendix and saving your life, but because he's in a trade union, he decides to go on strike. And so he leaves right in the middle of the operation. Well, I got news for you. If a doctor does that, you're dead. You're dead. That's how stupid I think it is for anyone in a trade union to not show up to their job. Like, you're letting down your country. You're letting down your neighbor. Okay, so you want more money. Go to the bargaining table. Go make up a new agreement, but make it realistic. You know, have normal wages. There's so many labor unions and trade unions. They think their work is just as, you know, how to describe this? They think they should get paid what a doctor makes. And I'm like, oh really? Have you been to medical school? Have you done residency? I'm guessing you haven't if you're in a trade union. I think it's ridiculous what a lot of them expect to make. And yes, I understand sometimes their jobs are hard, but just because your job is hard doesn't mean that you have permission to lease and fleece the American people. That's ridiculous. See, what a lot of people don't realize is that these super high wages that these trade unions are demanding and are getting is causing a financial burden on our capitalistic society, because what they're doing is not capitalism, it's stealing. It's legalized thievery. They're overpricing their labor. I mean, no one likes it when someone overprices a stock, right? So why is it these trade unions get away with it? It's because they have the power of the Democratic Party to back them up. And it's also because the Democratic Party has bought their vote. It's tick for tack. That's why so many of these trade unions give millions of dollars to the Democratic Party. And it's just like, let me put it this way. If trade unions were to give millions of dollars to the Republican Party, and the Republican Party did their bidding, wouldn't that be considered wrong? I mean, let's put the shoe on the other foot here. I would definitely say yes, that's wrong. Because you shouldn't have the ability to buy a candidate. That's not right. That's why I personally am in favor of limiting how much a candidate can receive in contributions in terms of like their political campaigns. I think it should be limited. Because I think that would level the playing field and it would keep things more honest. Can you eliminate all crooks and weasels? No, because, hey, look, if someone's a crook, they're a crook. They're always crafty. They're like leprechauns. What are you going to do? It is what it is. But here's the thing. If we don't have equality, then we don't have true unity. We still have division. That's why a lot of these trade unions have been a problem for a long time. And again, some of the things they do, as long as it's good, I agree with it, but it's very rare that they're doing good stuff these days. I remember as a little girl, I remember meeting people, just in everyday life, these adults, and they were always quick to tell my sister and I or our parents that they're in a union. And I thought they were nuts. Because all they could talk about was the union, the union, the union. And I'm like, what in the world? Are they talking about the Union of the United States? My parents are like, no, it's a trade union they're in. They're like, just ignore it. Every single person I've met over the years that is in a trade union or some type of labor union, they are just completely in delusion about what labor costs, what goods cost, and how the economy is in the United States. Like they're just in la land. It's like they live in a castle all the time. And they don't understand, hey, there are peasants in this world, and there is a middle class. But to think that you're in the upper crust just because you're in a trade union, that makes no sense whatsoever. You know, they kind of have the ivory tower syndrome. You know, the most normal workers I've met over the years are those that are not in trade unions. And typically I found those people work harder than people in trade unions. Because they know they don't have a labor union, you know, to cover their back if they don't do the job well. Here's the thing. People that are not in trade unions, they know they will be held accountable. On the opposite spectrum, people that are in trade unions, they know they are protected by their trade union so that they don't have to be held accountable. That's the problem with the labor force and trade unions. And every single one. They are never really held accountable for what they do, what they don't do, and the problems that they cause. I think it would be absolutely amazing if all trade unions became capitalist. Because every single one of their workers would financially do better. Because their wages would not be dependent upon some stupid contract that's negotiated by a president of their union that they probably don't even know. I mean, I just don't get how people can pay into a system like that, to a trade union, and then not question it. I just find that odd. People question the IRS all the time. You know, how come people are not questioning these trade unions? And they have a lot of scandals. They have a lot. And they have a lot of corruption. They have a lot of crime. They have a lot of federal violations. We don't always hear about them, but they do happen. I just think it's odd. But you know, God bless the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission because they took the SIU to court. They took them to federal court and they won. And SIU tried to get out of it. What are the odds of that? They don't, yet again, a trade union does not want to be held responsible for its bad behavior and or the discrimination that they practice on a daily basis. You know what's really sad about that court case? They practiced discrimination willingly and knowingly against people that were willing to put their life on the line because this type of work is not easy. It's not easy. It's actually very difficult work. You know, what's interesting is that one of the requirements for this job is that you have to be able to handle, you know, excessive physical demands. You know, one of the demands is to be able to stay awake all night and to keep watch consistently. I mean, just think about that. Like they're not even lifting anything. Well, then imagine if they're having to do work at night and be able to lift a bunch of stuff. You know, lift a lot of weights or whatever. Something that's very heavy. You would think that a labor union that does such strenuous and dangerous work would not be, how do I describe this? Would not have the audacity to discriminate against other Americans. But they did, and they did all the time. And it was seen as basically a habitual practice, meaning it happened all the time consistently, and it was just considered the norm. And that was considered their standard. So basically, age 18 to 34, you're free and clear to get the job as long as you're physically fit and you have no cavities. But anybody 35 years of age and older, you are a throwaway. That was the thinking of this trade union. And it probably still is their thinking because they still have the same president. See, even after they lost that court case, they still kept this guy, Michael Sacco. I mean, I just don't get it. Like, they keep the same bad people in management year after year after year, and it's just like, wow, nothing changes with corruption. Nothing changes. It's just bizarre to me. But when I take a look at how trade unions typically operate, again, they don't like being held accountable for anything that they do. So why would they care to change? Why would they want to change the status quo? Like, why would they want a change in shifts, so to speak? They liked the discrimination that they were doing. That's what's sad. It's very similar to the airline industry. They just thought it was the norm. They just thought, yeah, this is acceptable. It's okay. You know, it's really sad to me whenever an employer or an organization, they practice such horrible discrimination and they refuse to stop, and it gets so bad that the only way to get them to stop is to take them to federal court and sue them for millions of dollars. That's how sad I think that is. I just think, wow, that is such a violation of workers' rights. And yet this union is very Democrat, probably very liberal, possibly progressive, but it's very Democrat, and look at what they were doing to other Americans. You know, for those who think the Democratic Party doesn't discriminate, or how to describe this, for those who think the Democratic Party doesn't discriminate, or that they don't play favorites, or they don't try and pull stuff, you're completely wrong. And this trade union, SIU, is a perfect example of this. You know, I remember being in college, and some of the weirdest kids in my classes, or students I should say, because we were all around the same age at that time, some of the weirdest students in my classes were those that they were anti-United States. I'm like, are you American? They're like, yeah. I was like, how can you be against the United States, but yet you're an American? Like you're from here. Like, you know, do you know how lucky you are to be born in this country and to go to this school and to have these opportunities? It was just ridiculous. And here's the thing. Back then, it was rare to have liberals and progressives as students in the class. Now it's becoming the norm. So now I feel sorry for conservative students in colleges because they are very much outnumbered these days. Like back in the day, the only liberals and progressives we had on campus were typically the crazy nutbag professors that we had. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I've seen several YouTube videos where there's like, I guess is it the Young Americans Conference or something? I forget the name of it. But there's a couple different popular YouTubers right now that are very conservative. And they go to these different events and they talk, you know, on college campuses. And it's basically an open dialogue with them and the students and things like that. And that's great. They have debates. That's wonderful. And like Ben Shapiro is one of them. He goes and talks at these college campuses, and he is sharp. My goodness, he talks so fast. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I'm impressed with his speaking skills. He is so he's sharp. He's quick. He's definitive. I think that's awesome. I'm just amazed with his oracle skills. That's amazing. But anyway, these liberal students, I mean, they're not even shy about supporting Stalin and Lenin, and that's who they associate with. Like, if I was up there on stage, like with Ben Shapiro and some of the other speakers up there, and a crazy liberal nutbag student that's wearing like a Stalin or Lenin t-shirt got up and asked me a question, and it would be like super crazy, I think I would stand there stunned for a while because my mouth would drop. First of all, that they think Lenin and Stalin were great and are the answer to everybody's problems. And they think Marxism is wonderful. And that Marxism and communism frees people when it's just the opposite. It enslaves and entraps people. Like, I think I would just kind of stand there dumbfounded. I think I'd have to be slapped silly or something, or just, kind of, throw some water on me or something. I would just be shocked because, back when I was in college, you maybe had one or two students like that in your class, and they were known as being weird. They were not the norm. Now what was considered weird is the norm. I think that is strange and bizarre because it makes no sense to me. But look at it this way. When these kids, these idiot kids that are in college now, that are against America and they throw all these hissy fits, when they get out in the real world, they're in for a rude awakening. They are very much they're very much in line for a shock. A bigger shock than what I have seen over the years. But, because a lot of these students, they would actually make the worst type of employees a company could ever hire. Because who would want to hire a troublemaker? Who would want to hire someone that doesn't value employment, that doesn't respect their employer? And I'm not saying that the employer is always correct, because they're not, but these young folks, I just don't understand how they're just like these trade unions and the LGBTQ community. They're not pro-America. They don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand federal law. They don't understand state law. They don't understand economics. They don't understand supply and demand. Like, they don't understand basic everyday living, and they don't understand currency. But yet, these are supposedly these super educated kids that are graduating from colleges. You know what's sad? The people that have more common sense than these elitists that go to these schools are people that work at grocery stores. That's just like, that may sound odd to say, but I find that conversations with people that work at grocery stores are way more enlightening. They have way more common sense. They actually understand the economy. But these pompous, arrogant, entitled kids that go to college these days, especially these elite schools or whatever, they don't have a clue about how to be a good worker. And I think they would be offended if I were to ask them, what does it mean to be a good worker? I guarantee you they would be pissed off at the question, and they would not understand that, hey, all of us are workers. Unless you inherit a lot of money, everybody has to work. There's nothing wrong with being called a worker. But I guarantee you, every single one of those Marxist, Leninist, stuck-up, snobby college kids these days, these entitled, super young people or whatever, I guarantee you they would be offended at that question. What does it mean to be a worker? What is the role of a worker, and what is the role of an employer? I guarantee you, those questions would totally piss them off because they do not understand capitalism. They do not understand democracy. They do not understand economics. Which is bizarre to me. I don't understand how they don't understand this stuff when they live in a capitalistic society. Almost all of them have an iPhone or some kind of fancy cell phone. All of them go to the store and buy what they need. All of them, pretty much pump gas in their car. Pretty much all of them drive a car. Like, my point is this. All of them, at least once or twice a day minimum, participate in some form of a financial transaction in this country. Meaning money had to change hands, whether it's through the chip or through your debit card, credit card, or cash, or whatever the case may be. Like, they obviously know how to go and buy their favorite shoes. So how is it they don't understand how the economy works? How is it that they don't understand privatization? How is it they don't understand capitalism? How is it they don't understand the differences, like the clear differences between the private sector and the public sector? See, the way these kids think, this entitlement, is exactly how these trade unions operate. But their sense of entitlement and nepotism goes back at least 100 years. And then we wonder why we have all these weird young people that don't care to work, but yet they want the money. Gee, are they all Greek? I mean, my goodness. Does anybody care to show up to their job? I mean, it's ridiculous. I've never seen this before. And I remember when I was their age, I mean, I'm not old, not by any means, but I remember when I was in college, I loved going to school and having a job. I loved it. Because working while I was in school, it provided a stress outlet. And I loved earning a living. Because then I could pay for my own books, I could pay for my rent, I didn't have to rely on anybody. You know, I loved that. I loved working. I loved earning a living. And it's just one of those things that, you know, regardless of your situation where you get a scholarship to go to college or maybe your parents help you out. In my case, my parents helped me out and I had a job. So, but needless to say, you know, I was one of those kids that I loved working. Like even when I was in class, I was thinking about going to my next shift because I loved earning a living. That's just who I am. Like, I'm a worker. And there's no shame in saying that. But a lot of these kids these days, that term, worker, I guarantee you would piss them off. So I encourage you, if there's anyone here, the popular YouTubers these days, one of them is called Charlie, I can't remember his last name. But he's really good, really sharp. He's the guy that has not been to college, but he is way sharper than most of these college kids. Because he has amazing common sense and he self-educates. Which I'm more impressed with that than someone getting an education at a liberal school and then just speaking all this liberal garbage, you know, their entire life. But anyway, I encourage you, if you're one of these YouTubers, do ask these questions to these crazy liberals that go to these schools. I mean, just the craziness of it. And how another thing that's kind of creepy about these college kids these days, they just blindly support Planned Parenthood no matter what. Let me get a drink of water. They just blindly agree with Planned Parenthood all across the board. Even though there have been so many scandals about Planned Parenthood, it's like, how can you deny that stuff? Like, how can you support something that terminates a child? And also profits off of harvesting their organs. Like, that is cruel and sick. Like, to make money like that off of organs used to be called the black market, and technically, having a black market on organs is supposedly a federal offense. It's a crime. But Planned Parenthood gets away with it all the time. All the time. It's ridiculous. I mean, I remember being in college and Planned Parenthood, they definitely had a presence on college campuses, but it wasn't talked about. Because people knew, at least in my generation, I'm an 80s baby, but people knew that if you were talking about Planned Parenthood, more than likely it was always the girl that was talking about Planned Parenthood because she got knocked up and needed an abortion because she didn't want to go home with a baby. Now, mind you, I'm from Oklahoma, which is the Bible Belt. So my personal opinion on this is that the number one reason why a lot of women, young women, get abortions is because a lot of them have super religious backgrounds or parents or families and they can't go home being pregnant. They'll get shunned and shamed. And that's really sad. It's very sad. And every girl I've ever met, or every woman I've ever met that's had an abortion, they are not proud that they had one. In fact, they're quite sad. And they miss their baby. But every single one of them felt like they had to do what they had to do in that moment. But what's interesting also is that they did not have any type of family support. And Planned Parenthood was just there to take their money and their kid. And then make money off the fetus debris that they butchered in the procedure of abortion. Like, I just don't understand how so many college kids can just be so open to the idea of babies being aborted. I just don't get that. Like, that was... And to be proud of it. And be like, yeah, Planned Parenthood's great. It's like, how is it great? I just don't get that. I mean, it's just... it's like Planned Parenthood is almost like these trade unions in that they are untouchable. Why? Because Planned Parenthood is also protected by the Democratic Party, which is sad. I mean, here's the thing. With Democrats, you would think that they would not be for Planned Parenthood because Democrats, they want more citizens to vote for them, right? Well, if you're bumping off your citizens, your future citizens especially, these little kids, these babies, then how can you say that you care about the voter when you're for an organization that terminates pregnancies and makes money off of babies dying? I mean, you would think the Democratic Party would be against abortion because they want more people to vote for them. And you would also think that they would be against abortion because they say they practice inclusivism. Well, don't children matter? Don't babies matter? Shouldn't we include them in society? And shouldn't we protect them because they are the voice of the voiceless because they're so young, they're so little? I mean, here's the thing. Adults, we have the responsibility to protect the unborn, the innocent, and anyone that is a minor. We have that responsibility. We also have the responsibility to protect and defend each other. But there is a greater responsibility to protect the unborn and those that are minors. Planned Parenthood doesn't agree with that. They want to make money off of it. The Democratic Party doesn't agree with that. I mean, it's really sad to me. And what really kind of opened my eyes to how trade unions are not really who they say they are is that I started noticing very dangerous trends with them, that they very much operate like Planned Parenthood. They claim to care about people, but they really don't. They protect certain people, but discriminate against others. I think that's disturbing. And yet, this is happening in the United States, and yet they claim to be Americans, although they're not pro-America. And both trade unions and Planned Parenthood, they love to point the finger at Republicans and conservatives and say that we're the problem. And I just, initially it used to take me aback. I guess I shouldn't be so surprised these days because things are just kind of weird. But it's like, wow, Republicans are pretty much the only ones that are trying to help people protect the lives of the unborn, help people get jobs, help them make a lot of money and not rely on the government for a lousy, piddly paycheck which doesn't even cover groceries. It's the Republican Party that wants people to own property and not have to keep paying property tax on it every year. It's the Republican Party that wants to limit government, not empower it. It's the Republican Party that, doesn't want a dictatorship to take place. It's the Republican Party that wants you to have access to any and all types of health care because it's between you and your doctor. So I'm kind of surprised whenever people try and shame and blame the Republican Party and try and shame and blame conservatives. I'm just like, you don't get it. Maybe I could clear this up a little bit. Let me get a drink of water. Hold on just a second. The air is still very dry here in Oklahoma. It was really cold yesterday, and then it got a little warm today, so the air, I guess, is still recuperating in terms of moisture. You know, how do I describe this? The Republican Party is not about a political agenda. It's not about the woke culture. You know, conservatives are not about, how do I describe this? There's so much I want to say. The Republican Party and conservatives, we're not about controlling other people's lives. We're actually about freedom. We actually want people to be successful. We want people to make as much money as they want. If you want to be a millionaire, trillionaire, millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, or whatever the case may be, be a Elon Musk part 2, whatever, go right ahead. The Democratic Party and trade unions and labor unions, they are very much for a political agenda. They are very much for the woke culture. They are very much for manipulation. Republicans, we could care less about your to-do list or, like your personal political agenda, because within the Republican Party, you have the freedom to be you. Be who you want to be. But in the Democratic Party, you're very limited. Because it's like either you go along with our agenda and you're either with us or against us. In the Republican Party, I meet a lot of moderates. I really do. And it's just like, okay, to be in the Republican Party doesn't mean that you have to be white. It doesn't mean you have to be a man. It doesn't mean you have to live in Texas or Oklahoma or Kansas, which technically Kansas, I think Kansas is a stupid state because a lot of people from Kansas claim to be Republican, but they almost always vote Democrat. And they vote some really strange Democrat people into office that are very much pro-abortion. I'm like, oh, so you're really not a red state, are you? You're really not Republican. You really don't value human life like you say you do. Because you really see what the people stand for by how they vote. Sometimes what comes out of someone's mouth, it does not match their vote, which just irritates me. It disgusts me on that because it means they're two-faced. Kansas is very much like that. And also people from Kansas, they hardly ever know how to drive. It just drives us nuts here in Oklahoma. It's like, oh my gosh, it's another person from Kansas clogging up traffic. Happens all the time. But anyway, if you want to be free, if you want to have more liberty, if you want to have more access to a better job, then you need to be in the Republican Party and you need to vote Republican. Now you're probably thinking, well, yeah, there's some things I don't agree with. Well, there are some things I don't agree with as well. This might shock some people. I did not agree with President Trump when he nominated that chick to the Supreme Court. Is it Amy Barrett? Is that her name? It's the chick that is Catholic. I do not agree with hardly anything that she says or does. I just don't. I would not have picked her to be on the Supreme Court. I think her rulings and her faith, her Catholicism interferes with promoting democracy and freedom, because there is a lot within Catholicism that very much limits freedom and liberty. And, whenever I think about that Supreme Court justice, I wish her well and everything, and I hope and pray she does a really good job, but I just wasn't impressed with her, and I didn't get a good feeling about her because I don't think she understands the separation of church and state. I'm all for people having faith and being Christian, but I don't trust Catholics. And I say that as someone who used to be a Catholic. So, a person's faith does matter, but especially what faith they practice matters. Because Catholics, especially like diehard Catholics or whatever, they never question the Pope and they never question the priest. Well, the Catholic Church has had a lot of problems with homosexuality, pedophiles. It's horrible. And yet it was covered up by several officials or church officials within the Catholic Church. And they had been covering up for decade after decade after decade. And here's the thing. You know, when I was Catholic and Pope Francis became Pope, I was like, that's the best they could get to be Pope. I was like, okay, I'll pray for him, whatever. But he's a socialist. He's a socialist from a corrupt country. And the only reason why he was appointed to be Pope, I don't think it was because they prayed about it. I don't think they were guided by the Holy Spirit whatsoever, because the Holy Spirit is not for socialists. And the Holy Spirit is not for corruption. The only reason why Pope Francis was appointed to be Pope is because so many people from the Americas complained that most of the popes had been from Europe. And it's like, well, that's because most of Europe is not corrupt like the Americas. The Americas tend to have a lot of problems with communism, dictatorships, and mass murders on their own people. A lot of these countries in the Americas have a lot of human rights violations. And they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in capitalism. And actually, one of the first things that Pope Francis said about the United States, he criticized the United States because we're capitalists. And what I so wanted to say was, oh, so do you not want our money anymore whenever we tithe and we give to the church? I mean, really. Because if people don't have money, you don't have the Vatican. You don't have that fancy place. And mind you, Pope Francis, he doesn't live in the Pope's apartment because he put on this stupid vow of poverty, which he took as a priest because of the seminary he went to. Because here's the thing, a lot of people don't know that different priests attend different seminaries. And so whatever seminary they go to, that's the type of thinking that they have and that they agree with. Well, the type of vow that Pope Francis took to become a priest, it's like an extreme vow of poverty, which is absolute stupid. It's stupidity. I mean, it goes against the Bible. God is for prosperity and blessing. To be poor is technically a curse. It doesn't mean you're holy. In fact, it means you're stupid to be poor. Especially to wish poverty on yourself and others, it's technically a form of evil. But anyway, so Pope Francis, he's so against capitalism and was trying to make the United States look bad. He would not and still refuses to live in the nice apartment that the popes typically live in, and instead he lives in this cheapo apartment or whatever, but also it's because of that vow of poverty that he took. So here's the thing. You know, not long after he became Pope, he was criticizing the United States because of global warming, capitalism, fair market, free market, fair trade, and democracy. I'm like, wow, why am I not surprised he's saying all that? He's a socialist, and yet those stupid morons that are all men voted for this guy. Here's the thing. How can the Pope of the Catholic Church represent and protect all of his sheep when there are no female priests? None. And there are so many priests in the Catholic Church that are very much against women doing anything except baking a pie and going to like an altar society meeting. There's this one nut priest, I'll try and find his name, I don't know him personally, but he has this video on YouTube. He's against women being lectors in the Catholic Church, like doing any of the readings. I mean, that moron, he is such a sexist pig and an idiot. Like, what he's describing is very much like Sharia law, where women have no say and don't really get to participate in the Muslim faith. Because what people may not realize is that under the Muslim faith, women and men, once they step into the mosque, they're separated like the sheep from the goats. I mean, that's just how it is. It's a very sexist, piggish religion, and it is a cult. But you'd be surprised how much of that happens in the Catholic Church. And you're probably thinking, Lesley, what does this have to do with this? Here's the thing. That Supreme Court Justice, she's Catholic and she agrees with a lot of things in the Catholic Church, and her faith very much dictates her decisions and her rulings. I don't like that. I mean, I think having a Baptist Supreme Court justice would be better than a Catholic. And you know how Baptists are. My goodness. They think a whole bunch of people are going to hell. But it's just like, Catholics are very different. Very different. And I just thought of all the people that Donald Trump could have appointed to be on the Supreme Court, he chose that chick. And I'm a Christian saying this. And I used to be Catholic, and I left the Catholic Church because I couldn't take it anymore. I just thought, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Because I actually converted to Catholicism. I've probably said this before. I converted to Catholicism in my mid-20s. And then I left the Catholic Church probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So fairly recent in terms of practicing faith. But I was not happy in the Catholic faith probably for the last, 5 to 8 years that I was in it. Because I started noticing more and more things that are not right. They're either not Christian, they're not founded on God's love, they're not found on God's holy word. It's very anti-female. It's very oppressive. It's very super religious, but it's not even to help people get to heaven. It's just basically to punish people, and it's shaming and blaming. And I'm like, our society and our culture does not need help shaming and blaming each other. We need help being kind and gentle and forgiving and being accommodating. So, I just always get concerned whenever there's a Catholic in political office. And I never thought I would say that. And let me stand up because I've been sitting for almost 2 hours. But what's interesting is that you have to be careful about who you appoint to different positions like this. Because a person's faith very much dictates a lot. And there's a whole lot in the Catholic Church that I do not agree with. There are a few things that are still okay or good or whatever, but I left for a really good reason, and it was because I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, this is not right. I think I've said this before in times past. Now I understand why people were very hesitant about nominating or voting for John F. Kennedy because he's Catholic, or he was Catholic, excuse me. Because Catholics, they're just stupidly blind and obedient and allegiant to the Pope. And it's like, you know what? The Pope is not in charge of the United States. Never has been, never will be. But I noticed that, when I was Catholic, that people just had this bizarre allegiance that superseded common sense and also did not honor the laws of this land. And it's like, our founding fathers knew what they were doing when they had separation of church and state. They were very smart in doing that. Because they didn't want the church to be in charge of the state. So needless to say, that's why I do get concerned with the Supreme Court justice that's Catholic, or any political official that's Catholic. Like, I have a very hard time believing in them or voting for them, whenever they're running for office and things of that nature, especially here locally, because I see the problems with it. I very much see the problems with it because their allegiance is typically not to the United States, it's to the Pope. And right now, they have a Pope that is a socialist nut, who does not think very kindly or pleasantly about the United States because he's against capitalism, but yet, hey, look, the Catholic Church loves money. If they didn't love money, they wouldn't want your money. But, you'd be surprised how many priests are greedy. And nuns, but I would say predominantly priests in terms of greed, because it's mostly the priests that are in charge of these churches, because they hardly ever let nuns do anything. So I don't know why anyone would become a nun these days because of that. But anyway, to kind of wrap this up, because I've been trying to close this out several times now, but stuff has been coming to mind. Here's the thing. There has to be a balance between church and state, between the public sector and the private sector. We have to have a checks and balance system, and that's why our government is set up the way that it is. Here's the thing. If you go along with what trade unions want, we won't have a private sector. If you go along with what, basically what the Pope would want or what the Catholic Church would want in this country, we would only have church, we would not have states anymore. That's why we have the Constitution of the United States, because it greatly limits and hinders the possibility of problems like that from occurring. But here's the thing, it limits it, it doesn't completely diminish it. And here's why. Our founding fathers gave us the opportunity as citizens and future citizens of the United States to determine the fate and the destiny of our country. Because again, they did not want a monarchy, they did not want a dictatorship, they did not want something that is just going to suppress people. So it is within our freedom that we have the responsibility to take responsibility of our country. But if you put your country in the hands of a trade union, you're in a lot of problems there. If you put your country in the hands of basically like the Catholic Church or something, you're going to have a lot of problems there. Because, the Catholic Church, they have this pro-life movement or pro-life march or 40 days for life or whatever the case may be. They're all for protecting children in the womb, but yet they don't protect little boys once they're born. That's the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church. That was one thing that always bugged me. But no one would ever call them out on it. They didn't want to talk about it. I'm like, look, if you don't shine a light on the very sin that is causing this problem, then that sin and that behavior will continue to happen. As Christian believers, as believers in Christ Jesus, we have a responsibility to call people out on this stuff and to not back down from what we are supposed to take care of, what we are supposed to call out and say, hey, that's not right. That's illegal, that's immoral, that's unlawful. Hey, we got a problem here. You either stop or we're going to have a new problem, and that's going to be dealing with you. See, here's the thing. The Catholic Church, they often think that they are above the laws of the United States. They do this all the time. And some Catholics have told me off about this. I'm like, no, actually, you're wrong. You are very much wrong. They think, the Catholic Church is sinless. Oh, it's so full of sin. It's unbelievable. The Catholic Church, they don't honor the laws about, taking pedophiles to court, pressing charges. They don't honor our immigration laws. They keep bringing refugees over here that are predominantly not Christian. They're predominantly Muslim. And we can't hardly prove who they are. And they sneak them in. They transplant them in small communities. In places where people don't think to look. They don't transplant them in Los Angeles or New York or Miami. They put them in these small towns and stuff. It's exactly, side note, this is exactly what Merkel did, who was the leader of Germany for a while. I think she got voted out. I think they turned on her own party, the liberals or whatever. But, she and her party brought in a whole bunch of Muslim refugees. This was back when, Pope Francis was lecturing the entire planet about helping all these Muslim refugees find new homes. And it's like, we're not responsible for them. They need to fight for their country. If they're not willing to fight, sorry, that's their loss. But anyway, the leader of Germany, back when there was a huge refugee crisis, supposedly, Merkel brought in all these refugees into Germany. And she put them in houses and villages where a lot of Germans had died or passed away, like they got old and passed away. So instead of these Muslim refugees actually purchasing the property and buying it, the government just gave it to them. And then they started paying them all this money per month not to work. See, they didn't transplant those refugees in like Berlin or something, or, like a large city or something. They went through the back door, not the front door. And here's the thing, the German citizens, once they started figuring out, hey, what's going on here? Our village is slowly becoming a Muslim village, and they're wanting a mosque, and they're going to have that stupid speaker blaring for hours. And now we're going to have these hate crimes perpetrated against Christians by Muslims. And these Muslims, they defaced a lot of cathedrals over there. They've been doing that in France for years. But see, here's the thing. It's very interesting. The Catholic Church does exactly what that Merkel chick did. They sneak refugees in. And then they pat themselves on the back claiming that they did something humanitarian. Well, it's not humanitarian to bring in people that are not for the United States, but actually against the United States. They believe in Sharia law. We do not. So why would you bring in people that do not understand our way of life, our ideology, don't care to understand it, and they just really want to take over our country, town by town, city by city, city council by city council, and that's what's been going on in Michigan for a long time now. But see, here's the thing. What's really interesting about the Catholic Church is that it's very similar to the Democratic Party. They claim to care about human life, but they really don't when it comes down to it. You know, what's really interesting is that there are so many Democrats that are Catholic. I don't get that. I don't get how someone can be Catholic, and supposedly, the Catholic Church is for pro-life, but then you have so many Catholics that are for abortion. And then they take the Eucharist. They receive communion. And it's like, wow, do they not realize that the very Eucharist that they are partaking in is the body and blood of Jesus Christ, and Jesus is in heaven with all those aborted babies? And that the first and last thing those aborted babies knew was pain and suffering. That's why I don't get how Catholics that are Democrat can take the Eucharist. I don't get that. Because if they truly believed in Jesus Christ, they would not believe in abortion. They would not believe that it's okay to get rid of someone at any stage in life. So needless to say, there are so many commonalities between trade unions, LGBTQ community, the Democratic Party, and I would say also the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is not this conservative entity that people think it is. Yes, they have these big, beautiful churches that were paid for by the parishioners with their money that they earned via capitalism. But just because a church is beautiful does not mean the faith that the people practice is beautiful. It actually could be very suppressive and oppressive. And that may shock some people, but that was my experience with being Catholic. If I had known what exactly the Catholic Church, what they were behind the scenes, I would have never converted to Catholicism. I would have never done that. Never. If I had known what kind of hell I was going to go through being Catholic, I would have never converted to it. But, I look at it this way. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And now I know behind the scenes what goes on with that stuff. And what's interesting is that now I see the correlation between these things. Whereas before, if I had never been Catholic, I probably would not have any of this insight that I have now. But I will say this, I am so thankful that I'm not Catholic anymore. I thank God every day that I'm Christian. But I'm so glad I'm not Catholic anymore. Because the moment I walked away from Catholicism, that was the moment my life started getting better every day. Because there was no more shame, there was no condemnation, there was no browbeating. It was just freedom. There was freedom from oppression. Like, I didn't have to deal with that anymore. Do I know some nice Catholics? Yes, of course. But that faith, to me, is very much a cult. because it suppresses women. Which is also why I don't know how women that are Democrat can be Catholic. Because usually Democratic women are very much pro-feminist. And it's like, well, if you're pro-feminist, then how can you be a part of a religion that suppresses women? And there are some mean priests out there. Mean. They hate women. I don't know what their mama did to them, but some of them, they really hate women. I'm like, well, that's your problem, not mine. Good luck with that. I always tell people, if you have a problem with someone, take it up with God first. Let Him guide you. You know, ask for wisdom, but don't just go out being mean to people. Me and I met some weird priest over the years. And I was like, how is that guy a priest? How did he ever get into seminary? How is he being employed to be a spiritual leader? I don't get it. I do not get it. You know what it's like? It's like having a politician that's corrupt and they keep getting elected. It's like, okay, we know all this fraud and embezzlement is going on. How is this elected official, how do they keep getting elected? It doesn't make sense. That's what it felt like seeing these priests, these bad priests, stay priests in the Catholic Church. And it took like, it was like pulling teeth to get them, you know, to be defrocked. It usually took a human rights violation or a federal or a state crime, a criminal offense, to get them defrocked. That very much reminds me of this trade union, the SIU. It shouldn't take something catastrophic to stand up for what's right and protect the innocent. It just amazes me sometimes the things that happen, and not in a good way. Usually amazement should be a positive. I'm just like, man, some of this stuff takes me aback. But here's the thing. Trade unions are very similar to the Catholic priesthood in that they circle the bandwagons around the people that are causing the problem, and they don't ever hold them accountable. And if they ever do hold them accountable, it's minimal. Which is why they get away with so much stuff. But I will go ahead and end this podcast because I didn't realize it's going over 2 hours, but I guess definitely a good talk here. But I will go ahead and end this podcast. But as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. God bless and bye-bye.